There's one party that I think really doesn't benefit here, and I think that's the banks. And I'm getting this notion that actually with stablecoins, there's still this paradigm, this structure of like lending that's happening. We're just not lending to the banks. We're lending to the government directly. And that's where the consumer retail security comes from, because you have that direct relationship with the United States government. It's a similar structure. We just cut out this middleman layer, which is the banking layer. So what does happen to the banks in this paradigm? Like, does this whole industry just contract meaningfully?
I think it contracts, but I don't think it vanishes, right? Because if you look at the core value of banks, they're doing a couple of things for the world. So, one, and I want to be clear, I think these are valuable like services to provide. The discussion we're having is really at what cost should they be provided. So, one is credit intermediation. I do think people should be able to like borrow money to start businesses and buy homes, right? Like call it the Bitcoin maximalist view of all credit is bad is an argument in favor of like European feudalism where only a landed aristocracy has money. I don't
Right.
think that's a great system. We've seen that historically. The question is just what's the rate for those things? But keep in mind, higher rates also bring prices down. There's a leveling effect there. Another thing that banks are very good at sort of systematically over time has been securities issuance and market making in that space. Right. As you get to the investment banks, like away from just community banks, that is a real service. As much as people want to hate on Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Citi or, even Lehman back in the day, I think the fact that American companies can form, raise capital, and exist at scale has a lot to do with the investment banking system that we've built up in the United States. And I do think it's important that we still have that. Again, the question is just what is the cost for services there? The last part, which is the part I think banks will stop doing, is payments, right?
Mm.
Like banks right now basically run the payment system. And in that context, I kind of ask the question of why. And that is a very like American way of doing it. If you look at Europe, they have like e-money issuers. If you look at China, they have like the everything apps. And those people are the ones largely running payments. Like the idea that the banks should have a monopoly on the payment system, I don't think is a given. And I think that's where they'll lose.
Is this, by the way, Austin, why payments suck so bad in the US? Like ACH payments, like I still have to use a checkbook for a lot of things, which is like ridiculous.
Payments, so listen, if you've lived in the United States and you've never lived anywhere else, let me tell you that you are essentially living in the 1970s when it comes to payments. I don't
Wow.
think people realize that, but like, so trivia question for you guys. If I asked you to give me a guess on how many years ago real-time payments went live in Japan, what would your answer
And
be?
what's real-time payments really quick? Is this just
Like instant 24/7 instant
like
payments.
a
Real
Venmo
settlement.
type of experience?
Yes.
But
Yes.
really,
I'm
like
gonna go with the 90s.
I think it's post internet, I would say early 2000s.
Yeah, those are both good guesses. And here's the point that leaves us in. We're like, what, 25 years out of date as a result of that in the US system?
Right.
Right. So, like, again, Asia has had RTP since basically late 90s, early 2000s as you run around there, right? Like this whole like, oh, we don't know how RTP will work. It'll be dangerous is like, have you heard of the existence of South Korea? And, I just find this infuriating as somebody who looks at international finance that we can't get there. So, yes, it's largely like a combination of bank monopoly and legislative and regulatory inaction because there's no reason we can't. We just haven't.
And stablecoins immediately gets us there. If the entire US system was substituted out, like suddenly overnight for stablecoins, basically we're already there, real-time payments via stablecoin.
And doing it with stablecoins has an important benefit that a lot of the current Asian RTP systems don't have, which is those are still closed systems, right? So there may be a 24/7 system, but getting access to it, being a member and like integrating into that is hard. When you're using a stablecoin on a blockchain and it's an open access system, that is a totally different experience when you have money Legos. Because now I can get my money from my brokerage account to my checking account, or I could go like buy a car with it, or I could go like put it in compound, like whatever the hell you want to do on a uniform platform, which is not always the case even in the RTP countries, right? That may be solely within like the banks. And I think the money Lego component of this is something the TradFi people really have had a hard time wrapping their brains around because the system they live in is so antithetical to that.
Right.
Right. It's like,
It's money
Plato's
silos.
allegory of the cave, yeah, type thing. Like you've got to come out of the cave and see it. or you don't really understand what the shadows on the wall mean.
There's a punchline that you leave, I think, at the end of this section in your tweet thread saying, TLDR, if you're not strongly in favor of the public massively subsidizing bank executive compensation and rich billionaires borrowing money, you're pro stablecoin. You just don't realize it. And I do want to remind listeners that this is all kind of like a pragmatic reaction to 2008. At least that's what I see. Like, Bitcoin created after the 2008 financial crisis, but Bitcoin, it has its fantastic merits. 21 million hard cap, can't inflate the supply. It's digital gold. That's fantastic. I think stable coins are actually the far more pragmatic answer to the 2008 financial crisis than I think we frequently discuss in the crypto world, because it is the same unit of account. It's working its way into the financial system more deeply than Bitcoin. And it does take the payment side of the equation out of any material amount of risk. Is that what you see, Austin, where you just see like a more pragmatic 2008 solution here?
Yeah. So my friend Omid, who's a professor up at Columbia, once referred to me in a debate/argument we were having as a, quote, disgusting crypto moderate. So I think you having hit me with like the pragmatic comment is the less funny version of that. But yeah, I'm very much a functionalist. I just want stuff to work. I want to get to better systems for people. By the way, I can make arguments both in favor of fiat currency and Bitcoin, and I think in a future system both will coexist. It's not going to be one or the other. So I'm very pragmatic in the form of like, there are many solutions here, all of which can make things better, and really we should be trying all of them.
And we've been talking about in this podcast so far why this is good for America, but there's also a section in your podcast, in your Twitter thread, about why this is good for the rest of the world. Maybe you could just illustrate what you see when we, as America, builds this like crypto stablecoin based payment system inside of our banking system internally. What might that do for the rest of the world? How do we export some of the power here?
I will say, I actually think from a long-term perspective, this is the significant part of what we're doing, like the most important part. And by the way, if you're a Democrat in America who's been skeptical about crypto, you need to think really, really hard about this if you want to continue to be skeptical. And what I mean is this: stablecoins exist on a blockchain where, one, to get a hold of them, only two conditions need to be true. You need to have the internet, and you need to have something of value to exchange for them. And what this means is extractive, evil, corrupt regimes have a very hard time preventing people in their countries from buying stablecoins, right? If I am in Nigeria, where the financial management of the country has been pretty poor, if I am in Venezuela, where they've just straight up expropriated people in bank accounts, if I am in Russia or China, where if you're a political dissident, they'll just seize your entire bank account and be like, it's ours now, goodbye. This gives people a way to opt out of that, both in terms of where they keep the money. So it's on a blockchain. It's not in the local system. Your local people can't just steal it from you. And two, to put it in dollars, because the other way corrupt central banks steal from their people is through inflation, right? And this gets people out of both. And if you live in a Western society where whatever complaints we have about the US financial system, and trust me, we've had plenty, they pale in comparison to complaints about like the Zimbabwe financial system, right? It's not even orders of magnitude the same. Creating the opportunity for anybody in the world to opt into the US dollar system with self-custody is maybe the single largest human rights upgrade we can make. And by the way, will systematically over time grind every single exploitative regime into dust from a monetary perspective by giving people that option.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.